Okay, so I'll continue talking about the bureaucratic authoritarian regime and how some cases actually would be considered as exceptions, or except we can like look into some exceptional cases. What there is and how some cases actually would be considered as so as I mentioned, I would single out Mexico and Paraguay, Venezuela, and Central America, that they had totally different political developments or totally different trajectory with regard to this popular incorporation period and um, the establishment or the installation of these bureaucratic authoritarian regimes that cascaded Latin America, the Latin American region in the 60s and then in the 70s. So I'll talk today about Mexico and then Central America. And perhaps, I can compare Mexico with Paraguay, and then I'll leave the whole story about Venezuela when we talk about the neoliberalism and the collapse of the two-party system there, and the effect of the oil on the institutions and the perceptions of the citizens' perceptions on about democracy. So how Mexico actually diverged from this trajectory, this pattern of development in the region. So firstly, as I mentioned, it witnessed after this kind of oligarchical domination. So what happened, it was like a total revolution, the eruption of the revolution in Mexico in 1910, 1911, that put an end to the Diaz period. So after this period, it was like a totally, like for roughly 3 decades, it was a fierce struggle between different elites, even those that initiated or involved in the revolutionary process. And the availability of the workers and the peasants to these competing or rival elites gave them kind of leverage, political leverage, to be a potential ally or potential constituencies for rival elites in order to increase their bargaining position in the face of their enemies or their competitors. So that's why, in order to increase their bid on power and to increase their kind of degree of autonomy in relation to other political rivalries, so they actually reached out to these popular sectors and offered some sort of or promised some sort of political and social concessions in order to gain their support. So this kind of fierce elite struggles led to like bloody transfer of power, there is like until mid 30s. What happened, it was like Mexico was like permeated with this kind of political assassination and political instability. No kind of peaceful transition of power happened during that period. So that's why they needed to agree on, or to have kind of to agree on a mechanism that would limit this fierce competition or bloody conflict between different elite factions, and to actually demobilize highly mobilizable popular sectors. So if they sorted out, these kind of disputes among themselves, so they would actually manage to stabilize popular sector, the popular classes, and to stabilize the entire political and social order. So that was happened under Cardenas Sexenio. It came from like the president had to stay in power for 6 years, so it's like a 6-year term. So that's why it was called like sexenio. So during that period, like from 34 till 40, Cardenas started to come up with this kind of institutional mechanism in order to limit or to curb these kind of elite conflicts or fierce elite struggles. So he started to reorganize the popular sectors into the Revolutionary Party, the PRM, and then the PRI, the the Revolutionary, the Institutional Revolutionary Party. So he started to draw together all kind of popular sectors, mainly the labor, peasants, and other kind of popular organizations, and reorganize them into the hierarchy of the political party. So he established CMT, the Confederation of Mexican Labor, and CNC, the National Confederation of Peasants, and then CNRP, the National Confederation of Popular Sector. So he actually organized them, became kind of part and parcel of the organic structure of the party, and by then the party controlled the political activities and controlled the process of demand making by controlling these confederations or controlling the appointment of the top leadership in these confederations. So he actually managed to establish like a well-disciplined organizational arrangements or organizational structure within the party in order to sort out, to offer some sort of focal point or coordinating device for political elites in order to solve their disputes. So according by this party, the party controlled, the appointment processes, the selection of the next presidents. The party controlled by like mainly through fraud, the elections that actually guaranteed its political dominance for roughly 7 decades. So this is from one hand, like they actually solved this kind of elite disputes, and on the other hand, they incorporated these popular sectors into the organization or the hierarchy of the political party. So they actually managed to demobilize these popular sectors, and they undermined somehow their bargaining leverage in the face of different political elites. So the PRI existed, but allowed for different other parties, to exist as well, but they didn't have like a real chance in reaching power. So they allowed PAN, like the National Action Party, to exist. The party represented the right, and it was mainly it drew together different conservative elements and different elements from the Catholic Church as well, and then attracted some business groups or business people. It was like quite representative of this class. So it was like allowed to exist, and the PRI actually tamed the opposition that came from the PAN as well by offering some sort of concessions, and allowed for some other rightist forces to exist. But these forces were regionally based, didn't actually represent a real electoral threat to the PRI. But the actual threat came from some like militias that affiliated with the Catholic Church, and they perceived that some sort of threat came from women as well, and from communists. So that's why these interests were totally disarticulated, or these groups were totally disenfranchised between 1940 and 1980s. And the PRI and the political elites inside the party actually prevented these groups to voice any sort of oppositions, or to build their own well-organized constituencies. So through this kind of mix of disarticulation of some threatening forces, and cooptation of other forces by co-opting them into a submissive position or into acquiescence, mainly labor, peasants, and popular sectors. So actually the PRI managed to establish its control over society and its dominance over political landscape. And as I mentioned, like through these kind of different tactics of electoral fraud, the PRI actually managed to offer this like appearance of competitive authoritarian regimes by allowing different other parties to contest in elections and frauding or managing the elections as well, in order to prevent, any opposition voices from accessing decision-making circles or decision-making agencies. And through kind of engineering or gerrymandering the electoral constituencies, it actually undermined this proportional representation in order to water down like the regional polls of opposition. So actually fragmented, these kind of the design of the electoral constituencies actually fragmented the opposition and prevented the emergence of coherent bloc or coherent pole of the opposition, especially in the north and in Mexico City. So actually, the party managed through this kind of electoral manipulation and some sort of social control policies and extensive network of patronage and clientelistic machine by distributing some material benefits in order to buy votes on the one hand, and to forge elections on the other hand, and to like at the third aspect, they actually eroded any kind of regional support for the opposition parties, especially in some states that were well known for their support for opposition, especially in Chihuahua, as I'm going to say, and Mexico City on the other hand. So that's why the party managed for roughly 7 decades from the new formulation happened under Cardenas Sexenio until 2000, the party managed to establish its own uncontested political dominance and faced some sort of mild social resistance from different forces. But it was like the party managed to put down or to crush any kind of emerging social opposition that threatened its own party. And the party became the only institutional channel for political elites, people and like ambitious political elites that they needed to develop their political career. So the only option available, or the only avenue available for them, it was only so they had to affiliate themselves to the party, because the party controlled the nomination process and controlled any kind of access to Congress or even to the nomination to the presidency. So the party as well, the party controlled this nomination process, and like the existing or the current president, through pointing at like the next candidate in a process called the dedazo, by pointing at the next candidate that would become the president. So the party established some sort of internal discipline and prevented any sort of elite defection for people that they wanted to advance their political career. So they had to abide by these kind of rules in order to have a chance in this kind of nomination, and actually to cultivate some sort of personal relationship with the top echelon or the top hierarchy and the top leadership inside the party. So the party actually dominated, created well-disciplined structure in order to prevent any sort of elite defection until the late 80s, as I'm going to say, and actually established its control over popular sectors through this organic, corporatist structure, by incorporating them into the body of the dominant party, and co-opting other opposition, mainly PAN and any other sort of weak or mild opposition forces in society. So the party actually didn't, Mexico actually didn't witness this sort of popular incorporation, and then the collapse of these kind of populist authoritarian regime and the establishment of, or that gave rise to a new kind of repressive turn in Latin America. So it was kind of exhibited some sort of continuity with the parties, with the same party system from the 1930s until 2000. So it was kind of adaptive, competitive, authoritarian regime that managed actually to cope with different and to overcome different political and social challenges. So they had like totally different, they followed the same strategies of like co-optation and electoral engineering in order to manipulate social forces and political opposition. But as well, like the political leadership in Mexico or inside the party, they faced some sort of these rupture or traumatic events differently. So instead of like after the bureaucratic authoritarian regimes actually got installed elsewhere in the region. And then after the economic crisis hit hard in the 80s, this led to a new wave of, or the third wave of democratization, or a wave of, to like market some sort of a return to the democratic rule in the region. So again, Mexico faced, these kind of events differently. So instead of leading to the economic crisis, leading to the collapse of the predominance, or eroding the predominance, so the 3 consecutive administrations of Portillo, de la Madrid, and Salinas, they faced this economic crisis differently by applying different broad set of economic policies that managed to mitigate, the influence of the social pressures, came from these economic crises. So when they faced this so they actually undertook some nationalization measures, and in different occasions they tried to appease business community, because they developed some sort of autonomous position, especially inside the state bureaucratic apparatus, mainly in the financial sector or the financial apparatuses. So that's why they had to appease or to accommodate the interest of these of the business people or the business association on the one hand, and to absorb, the emerging social opposition on the other. So they took like some sort of trial and error policies in order to mitigate, some sort of economic and social pressures. And after, taking, instead of accumulating or allowing for some sort of anger to explode, so different administrations followed, different different social and economic policies in order to accommodate different interests. So they accommodated the interest of the business people in order to tame or to erode the basis of the PAN, and to guarantee the loyalty of these groups to the PRI. And on the other hand, in areas or in states that represented some sort of electoral threat to the PRI, so the PRI administrations actually took some decided to expand or to implement some sort of expanded social policies in order to co-opt, this rising opposition, and to enforce them to abide by the rules of the game laid down by the PRI. So actually, the most famous one, it was PRONASOL. It was the National Solidarity Program after this rising or growing electoral threat, in order to hedge, against, this electoral threat. So Salinas actually decided to incorporate or to integrate, these kind of rising popular sectors or popular oppositions into or to bring them into the pre-fold. So that's why he decided, to take on or to implement these extensive social programs in order to offer some sort of social security and social benefits and material benefits to dissatisfied sector. So this actually enabled the PRI to survive the crisis and to maintain still, its dominance, its political dominance over all like, you know, political posts and political positions. So what happened in the late 80s, it was like the party had to make this shift or this turn to neoliberal policies as well. And this faced some, the party, like the proponents of this economic liberalization measures faced some internal opposition that came from inside the party. And this led to like elite defection. It started first with the Democratic current led by Cardenas, that actually decided to run for the presidency in 1988 against the pre-candidate, and then formed the Democratic current. Actually, they had their own party, the PRD, the Democratic Revolutionary Party, that represented or positioned itself on the left of the pre, because the pre decided, you know, to go to veer a little bit to the right. So the PRD represented still, you know, this kind of leftist forces. And this the social content of the Mexican Revolution that represented this the popular sector, and with its commitment to social spending and some sort of leftist policies. So what happened? It was like now the PAN existed, and the PRD actually was like a faction or a breakaway faction from the PRI, and then the PRI still existed, perhaps somewhere in between the right and the left. But this changed the structure of political competition, because after when the PRI decided to implement, to carry out these neoliberal or economic liberalization measures, so they had to gain some sort of support in Congress. Now, like people affiliated with the Democratic current and then the PRD, they actually opposed this neoliberal shift or this turn in economic policies. So the party had to get some support from the right-wingers represented by the PAN. So the PRI, instead of forging elections or in order to prevent, you know, the opposition from gaining any sort of political leverage, especially on the state level, so the PRI had to concede or to succumb to the PAN victory in some states in order to get their votes inside the Congress in order to support the PRI's economic policies. So it was kind of, it increased the bargaining position of the opposition, mainly at this point the PAN, and the PRI actually had to open up some political space for the opposition, especially on the state level, in order to pass or to guarantee, you know, the promulgation or the enactment of their economic policies from the parliament. Because actually the main benefit, it was like the gaining dominant or the majority of seats inside the Congress, but the president didn't have at this point, you know, any sort of like any sort of political leverage over the legislative branch. So that's why they had to accommodate some interest inside or to win over, you know, some of the opposition candidates in order to guarantee the passage of their policy decisions and policy agenda. So that's why this enabled political opposition to gain some sort of political power, especially in Mexico City and the north. The north, like especially for the PAN, and Mexico City, the PRI actually lost the local elections in Mexico City in 1997, and it was like some sort. It didn't happen before, so that's why it slowly, like the dominant position of the PRI started to unravel slowly, and this actually pushed the party to move slowly towards political opening, more meaningful political opening. So in 1994, so after like Salinas sexenio from like in the 88, it was like the party started to the dominance started to erode significantly. So that's why the next administration actually had to proceed with and even to push through these political reform measures. And before that was like what happened, it was the electoral, it was like a turning point or a breaking point in the political reform in Mexico with the establishment of the Instituto Federal Electoral, the federal electoral institutions that actually undermined the pre-authority to control or to forge the elections. So this actually, the institute, it had some members from the PRD, so the other oppositional parties, the PRD and PAN, now represented inside or had like representation inside the IFE, and actually this prevented, any sort of maneuvering or any sort of manipulating the electoral results that guarantee actually the dominance or the electoral victory of the PRI throughout or over seven decades. So that's why the tools or the political tools at the hands of the priistas started to lose the tools there started to lose their leverage, and they had to offer some meaningful or some considerable political space for opposition to articulate different political programs and different or to campaign on a totally different social and economic platform. So slowly, actually, the party under Zedillo, they started to they continued actually with these kind of electoral and political reforms, and they remained committed to clean elections, transparent elections, and offering some space for political oppositions in municipalities to articulate their own programs. And actually, as I mentioned, in 1997, the PRI lost Mexico City to the PRD, and eventually in the presidential election in 2000, the PRI actually lost to the PAN candidate in this election, and this actually put an end to its the dominance of the PRI or the 7-decade dominance of the priista. So I can quickly compare Mexico to other one dominant party system in the region, mainly in Paraguay. Paraguay, as well as I hinted at last lecture, it followed a totally different path as well. So it had Stroessner established harsh, repressive, authoritarian regime in the region, and during this incorporation period, the country didn't witness, this kind of popular mobilization, especially from the peasant sector. And Paraguay, actually, as I mentioned last lecture, it didn't witness, this deepening industrialization or import substitution industrialization period that and remained predominantly agricultural when it comes to their the economic structure in the country. But it had the traditional elites that represented, the 19th century elites' interest, the Colorados and the liberals, dominated the political scene. So but the fierce struggle between these elite factions was actually finally sorted in the mid-50s by establishing this harsh military, after the military intervention and the establishment of this harsh repressive authoritarian regime, but it had this civilian component because the dictatorship actually aligned itself with the Colorados, because these two parties were deeply entrenched and represented, this kind of well-established elite interest. So it was very difficult for the military establishment to push them aside. So instead of edging or casting aside, these political elites, elites. So the military dictator actually aligned himself with the Colorado and purging the party and the other party, the Liberal Party, from any sort of opposition, and established its dominance over the party dominance over. So it had some sort of civilian component as well, because of the existence of the Colorados or the Colorado Party as essential component in the ruling coalition. So established, its dominance over the party, established its dominance over society and over the political landscape as well. And it had like the same component, but it didn't. They established this corporatist structure, but Paraguay didn't witness, this vibrant popular sector that got engaged in revolutionary Mexico. So unlike peasants in Mexico that played pivotal role in the revolutionary process, and the availability of both of them, like peasants and laborers, to different elite factions to offer some sort of potential as a potential ally to forge, some sort of alliance with these popular sectors to fend off or to balance out fierce political competition. It didn't happen in Paraguay. The popular sector was widely demobilized, and it didn't play any sort of they didn't develop any sort of identification or partisan identification based on this class structure or different sort of different content of the identity, like peasants, or different ideological orientation, like anarchist, or that actually motivated laborers in Mexico to mobilize. So it didn't happen in Paraguay. So that's why it was the two parties, the Colorado and the Liberal, managed easily to establish their own dominance through this only like clientelistic network and vast patronage network that actually penetrated rural areas, and they established some sort of vertical power relation with the peasants as a subject, and they had actually to abide by or to conform to this clientelist networks, because the two parties controlled access to resources like the credit or the agricultural inputs, and then the transportation and the marketing of their outputs. So that's why they had to concede to, or to actually to subdue themselves to the two parties and to abide by the same rules of the game, and to be totally demobilized. And again, like the severe economic crisis and the enactment of neoliberal measures, it didn't actually lead to the collapse of the Colorados, and then the dominance of the dominant position of the Colorado Party, and to some extent the Liberal Party. So what happened? Any factions, the internal factions inside the Colorado, and this kind of shift of coalitions between Colorados and Liberals, this actually delineated the parameter or the main boundaries of political acts or political activism. So it was only like ephemeral events of political mobilization when some sort of elite defections or elite factions happened. So peasants or peasants organizations actually made their way to the capital Asuncion in order to articulate their demands. Otherwise, it was totally demobilized, and actually they needed to negotiate with the state actors or with the party leaders in order to get some material benefits, because no other party like has an access to state resources. The only two parties that controlled all the resources, the Colorado and the Liberal Party. So that's why they had to mobilize in order to force them somehow to negotiate with them and to offer some concessions to them, to the peasants. So I'll talk more about the neoliberal turn. I think in 2 weeks. So when we are talking about how neoliberal term actually reshaped the party system and diluted somehow party identification, it didn't happen in Paraguay as well, that it followed like a totally different trajectory until 2008, when another outsider kind of assumed power and put an end to this Colorado dominance. But it didn't last for so long, because what happened, the parliament actually went through this impeachment proceedings and actually overthrew this political outsider, Fernando Lugo, from power in 2012, and then what happened was reenactment of the dominance of the Colorado Party after this short interlude or short period of interruption in the Colorado's dominance. So Central America as well, it followed somehow different trajectory from the one I talked about. So instead of like facing, you know, this reformist period and mass labor or like mass demonstrations and labor mobilizations, it didn't face, you know, this kind of social question and popular incorporation period. It faced another, the countries there actually faced a totally different reality and totally different like divisions politically and socially. So when I mention like Central America, so I mainly talk about Guatemala as it's shown in the map, Honduras, El Salvador, Nicaragua, and Costa Rica. So you have the article on the past dependency and the regime change in Central America. Mahani actually applied this historical institutionalism and path dependency to understand to what extent some kind of historical events and critical junctures in this area led to a different trajectory of regime change in the region, with the harsh military authoritarianism in Guatemala and El Salvador, and progressive, competitive democratic rule in Costa Rica, only in Costa Rica, and then traditional dictatorship in Nicaragua and Honduras. That was like until like the 70s, as I'm going to explain next lecture. So it was like a stable kind of political equilibrium for some time, but it doesn't mean that it endured, you know, for so long. But they faced like some sort of critical juncture, or they faced a situation where political elites had to make some critical policy choices or key choices that had some sort of implications, and these policies were consequential for the social economic structure, and later to the entire the establishment or the installation of different regime types. So what happened during that period? So instead of facing, as I mentioned, this question of popular incorporation and labor, how to demobilize and de-radicalize, and in what form we should incorporate the emerging labor forces, so they had totally different institutional development or political dynamics. So instead of having this division between oligarchical centers, or the oligarchical domination, and reformist or labor like the political elites that represent, you know, the new emerging labor forces, so they had some sort of division from within the wealthy elements of the traditional elites, between liberals and conservatives. So they both represented the same kind of wealthy traditional classes, but they actually disagreed over the pace and the scope of agrarian reform. So liberals, they wanted to proceed further with the with the export agricultural sector. So they needed to expand to undertake some sort of reform, but they disagreed whether or not we have to proceed like gradually to take this reformist position or radical position. So they divided or disagreed over the scope and the pace of economic and economic reform or agrarian, the expansion of the export agricultural sector, and they had to make some sort of choices at this critical moment, whether to have these kind of radical policies, radical reform policies, or gradual reform policies. So the agrarian economy and the agro-export expansion, what kind of form they needed, to transform this kind of agrarian structure by expanding the agro-export sector. If you remember, I mentioned last week, like indigenous people, they developed, this custom, or they like inherited from the colonial period of this having some sort of attachment or land ownership, that it took a form of a communal as indigenous people. So they owned, this land. So they actually the substantial portion or size of the productive lands were not held as private properties or private ownership. It was not there. It was mainly either like this kind of communal ownership by indigenous people or indigenous population, commune. It was like this communal ownership of lands, or it was not like centralized. It was left to municipalities to rent, these lands to villagers, what was called ejido system or ejidos, by renting, these portion of lands to villagers. And there existed some sort of government ownership as well. It was like baldios. So the government owned some portions of the land as well. So the liberals aimed at transforming, these communal land system into a private ownership. So they needed to displace, indigenous population or peasants from their lands in order to privatize, different size, like large or small land holding estates, in order to proceed or to expand, especially the agro-export sector, especially in coffee economy and banana sector as well. So the conservative, they needed to maintain their well-established interest, but liberals, they needed to increase their power resources. So they disagreed over the scope and the size, whether or not we go for privatization of large or small portions. What kind of size we can, like the scope actually, like full scale privatization, or just like limited scale or partial scale of privatization, and small land holdings or like large land holdings. So the scope and the size, and it depending on the level of threat they faced from the other rival forces from conservative. So they disagreed as well over how to modernize the state apparatus, mainly the military establishment or the coercive power of the military, in order to enable the military apparatus to enforce the land reform measures, or to enforce the reform legislation. So the disagreement over the scope and the size of the agricultural or the agrarian reform, especially in the export sectors, and the modernization or the capacity of the coercive capacity of the military establishment. And here you have what Nahoni actually graphed. So you have, like, these are the main kind pillar or conceptual pillars of path dependency argument. So you have like antecedent conditions. so you have this kind of nature of the cleavage between elite cleavage between liberals and conservatives over agricultural modernization and expansion. And then this phase of like the key moment or the critical juncture to make this decision, that the decision was consequential for the political dynamics and the entire social and economic structure, how to endorse some sort of radical reform, radical or gradual reform policies. So that was like the options available there. And once taking it actually usually becomes very hard to reverse, and it becomes some sort of self-enforcing, because it would be very difficult to return to the previous point. And each and every step you take, down the path, it would limit, your policy choices considerably. So that's why, but Central America was kind of, it's not unique, but the heavy presence of the heavy intervention from the United States as well played important role in these political dynamics and institutional developments. So from these kind of policy choices, radical or reform policies, or like gradual, like mild reform policies, this led to a new sort of institutional development that led to reproduction of radical reform measure or reformist period, or aborted liberalism or liberal reform period. And this actually persisted into or actually continued or endured over a long period of time. But this triggered somehow what he mentioned, this reactive, it's one of the essential concepts as well in this theoretical framework, reactive sequence. So instead of it triggered some sort of transformation and backlash against these kind of structural transformation or structural persistence by like, as I mentioned, perhaps like the counter mobilization in the popular incorporation period. And here it was some sort of the mobilization from subordinate classes or pro-democracy movements from subordinate classes in order to push for political reform and democratization measures. And from this interaction or from the military capacity here was essential. And this, the crucial factor was like the military coercive power that eventually led to this kind of political equilibrium or the political outcome of military authoritarianism in Guatemala and El Salvador, democratization, because in Costa Rica that it didn't develop this military coercive apparatus, and then traditional dictatorship in Honduras and Nicaragua, because of the intervention of the military, the intervention of the United States, or like the creation of this colonial environment, especially in Nicaragua, that actually the United States controlled its financial apparatuses and its the allocation of their funding and financial resources. And it witnessed some sort of reactive sequence and mobilization from below, but it was the main target or these kind of workers' strikes and like popular mobilization or peasants' mobilizations, it happened against the United States target, rather than they didn't target the domestic politics. They didn't ask for some sort of political opening or political democratization in these countries. So he actually deployed or applied this theoretical framework to the developments occurred in Central America during that period, in order to interpret the divergent trajectories or different outcomes with regard to regime types. So here of the two extreme cases, El Salvador and Nicaragua, with regard to the scope and the size of the agro export reform or expansion, they undertook Zaldivar and Zelaya in Nicaragua, they actually deployed this full-scale privatization, so far-reaching, privatization policies in order to enact this kind of, or to establish this kind of political private ownership, and to eliminate and eradicate, this communal land system or common land ownership. So it was like a full scale. They actually, almost all the lands actually got privatized, and they targeted at large and small estates as well. But both, they differed with regard to the level of state coercion. Like Nicaragua, it had like high level of military coercive power, and it was a little bit moderate in El Salvador. But both like ended up implementing radical policies with regard to agrarian reform. And Honduras, on the other extreme, was like it implemented Soto actually decided to implement partial privatization measure instead of large or extensive or full-scale privatization, and it targeted at small and large estates as well. So the only like middle cases were Guatemala and Costa Rica. It was a little bit extensive privatization measures, but and it was like, but it was like the size. The Guatemala actually targeted barrios, targeted at only large states, but in Costa Rica, the main target was like the main target was small estates, and it actually didn't develop. Costa Rica, it didn't develop this high coercive power of the military apparatus, but in Guatemala it was like highly repressive power of the military establishment. So it implemented as well radical reform measure, but Costa Rica, it ended up with this kind of reformist orientation of agricultural expansion, agro export expansion. So radical or reform policies, this kind of the orientation or the scope of these policies actually was determined by to what extent these countries proceeded, or at what stage they managed to even to push further with these kind of agricultural transformation. So actually with varying degrees, it led to this kind of privatization and of land holding states. It actually transformed the economic structure and the scope of the commercial agriculture and the integration into the global market, especially in the coffee and banana sectors. And it led to like a large scale of operation in all the countries. They managed to develop, except for Honduras, they developed, this large-scale operation of in coffee sector, or like large-scale plantation that led to the nourishment of the export of the prosperity of the coffee sector, and led to the expansion of the export in coffee. And this gave rise to or gave kind of political leverage to landed elites that worked in these kind of economic coffee and banana sectors. But the cohesiveness of economic elites was essential as well, because in all countries, the landed elites actually, they gained some sort of political influence, or like the same political elites actually came from these landed elites, and landed elites had a say in determining policy options and to have kind of influence in national politics. Honduras actually, it had like this kind of duality with regard to economic elites, because of the economic power didn't come from landed elites. It came from commercial and merchants in banana sector, and these economic elites didn't get access to state apparatus or like a decision-making circles. So they on the national level, the political elites actually were totally different from the economic ones. And the economic ones, they were not the landed ones. It was like the merchants that they worked in the banana sector. So the cohesiveness of the economic economic elites was essential as well in order to proceed or to abort or to halt, these kind of radical reform programs. And then the establishment of the coercive apparatus or military apparatus was essential in order to put an end to this kind of traditional pattern of caudillos rebellion in regionally based military rebellion, as I mentioned. So if the state managed to centralize its authority by establishing strong military apparatus, so it managed to centralize its authority and to have kind of dominance over or penetration to rural areas, and to put an end to this kind of regionally based military rebellious acts. And the class polarization as well was it led to this kind of the radicality and the reformist pace of the agrarian reforms led to different degrees of social mobilization. So in El Salvador, mainly it led to this kind of, it led to deep polarization in rural areas that actually paved the way for peasants' revolt. And it had like some sort of mild or moderate coercive power of the military. So that's why it was a little bit, easy to establish, this military authoritarianism, or to harshly crack down on the peasants' mobilization or subordinate class mobilization, and to reestablish the military, or to establish the military dominance there. So here are like the steps in these countries. So the radicals, or the ones, or the countries that took this kind of reform, radical liberalism to the very end, it was like Guatemala and El Salvador. So they implemented this massive expansion of commercial agriculture, especially in the coffee sector. And they got incorporated or integrated into the international market by expanding, the export activities. And this gave rise to agrarian elite with significant political power. So they had like the main, roughly a monopoly over national politics and decision-making process. So it was like kind of cohesive elite and elite circle, economically and politically. And they both, managed to centralize the authority by establishing or harnessing the coercive power of the military establishment. And both of them, because of this radical orientation with the implementation of these, the expansion of the commercial agriculture, this actually deepened the polarization, especially in rural areas. And this gave rise to some sort of mobilization from Pelot that actually that actually stimulated the military in order to intervene and to crack down on these mobilizations. And this actually led to civil wars in these countries, as I'm gonna like pick it up from here next time to talk about, the civil wars and more when we talk about the return of democracy and what happened in the civil war cases. But only Costa Rica, it actually it took some extensive privatization measure, but actually targeted only at small land holding states, and it got incorporated into the international and the global market, and the cohesiveness. The same like landed elites actually had control over national politics and considerable influence over decision making, and centralized the authority without having excessive, coercive power of the military, and without enabling this social and class polarization to emerge. So it actually stopped at, this centralization of the authority and this kind of cohesiveness of the elite circle. So that's why it didn't witness, some sort of, especially for a short period of civil war in the 40s, that actually pushed elites to think about how to stabilize, the only way to stabilize and to prevent them from happening again, just to reach, an agreement or a compromise in order to open and to have like competitive democratic system. So it didn't witness, this emergence of class mobilization or class polarization, and like this subordinate class mobilization, and then the military intervention to restore stability and order. Honduras and Nicaragua was represented cases of aborted liberalism, or this reform or agrarian reform or expansion of commercial agriculture. So the targeted at, as it's shown here, it was like partial. The scope of land polarization in Honduras was a little bit partial, and they opted for this reformist trajectory. Nicaragua was full and radical, but actually it got aborted because of the existence or the intervention of the military of the United States, that actually controlled it. It had control over its financial policies and its own funding. So it was like it was in Honduras for witnessed to a little bit different dynamics, some sort of intervention, but also it didn't have this kind of cohesiveness with regard to political and economic elites. It has some sort of divisions with the elite structure. So that's why they didn't witness, the entire they didn't face, this causal chain of divisions, like it didn't face like this kind of influence or control over national politics, and they didn't face, this kind of social or polarized class structure and class struggle that would call the army to intervene in order to stabilize the political and the social order. So this is how the actually how like the historical institutionalism and path dependency would help us explain the establishment of different regimes, different regime types in Central America. So only Costa Rica, with this reformist pace and moderate coercive power of the military, and the absence of this deep-seated class polarization in rural areas, it led to some sort of democratic opening and the establishment of democratic regime in Costa Rica, and the radicality of the agrarian reform measures in Guatemala and El Salvador actually deepened class structure, and as well with the coercive capacity of the military, it led to some sort of political instability and the intervention of the military in order to quell or to put down, to crush, this rural mobilization or pro-democracy mobilization kind of, and this led to the establishment of the military authoritarianism, and then the aborted liberalism happened in Nicaragua and Honduras with the initiation of these kind of commercial agricultural reform, but it led to a totally different trajectory because of the dynamics or the scenario played out differently in these countries, and this led to traditional authority actually enacted or reenacted its dominance in two countries, but it didn't mean that these countries didn't witness some sort of like workers' strikes in banana plantation in Honduras, or Sandino revolt in Nicaragua, but these actually was kind of erratic events and ended up and actually it meant or it targeted at only like the American colonization policies, and it didn't have any sort of demands with regard to democratizing or reforming internal politics in two countries until, like, you know, the Sandinistas, actually Sandinista revolt in Nicaragua. And this kind of traditional authority, what happened in Honduras, actually it was like quite path dependent in the country. So that was like until like the it was not like quite similar to bureaucratic authoritarian regimes in the rest of the or in the countries, you know, I examined in some detail last lecture. So it was different regimes, different types, and different political dynamics led to different kind of regime forms in these countries. So the rural mobilization and peasantry revolts in Guatemala and El Salvador, and to some extent in Costa Rica, it led to a totally different trajectory. And the key and the crucial element and the crucial variable here was the capacity or the coercive capacity of the military and the degree of the class polarization or class struggle. So in the first two countries, Guatemala and Salvador, it led to the establishment of the military authoritarianism and some sort of political instability and civil war in the country. And then in El Salvador as well, from the 50s through the end of the 70s as well, it led to the establishment of this military authoritarianism. And the only successful case that managed to establish this competitive system of competitive democratic system was Costa Rica after, as I mentioned, short period of civil war. The apported liberalism in Honduras and Nicaragua led to the establishment of traditional families or traditional political elites managed to take over or to re-entrench, you know, their dominance over political process and political dynamics. But as I mentioned, it was like this political equilibrium was stable for some time, but it got like disturbed, you know, later, as I'm going to explain next lecture. But here we need to compare the path dependency of Collier and Collier of the popular incorporation period that led to like mobilization and counter mobilization between conservative bloc and labor movements, and then the establishment of bureaucratic authoritarian regimes. And here Mahoney mentioned the path dependency in Central America that took kind of a different shape and different political scenario and different political dynamics. So with regard to the antecedent conditions here, it was in the case of like popular incorporation, it was like this oligarchical domination and the emergence of the social question, or how to incorporate legally and constitutionally the social rights of the popular sector, and in what forms, like to incorporate them into the state apparatus or into like the party system or the existing, you know, party system, or just to use them strategically and instrumentally just to mobilize labors for popular mobilization, as it happened in Colombia and Uruguay. Or like it took a form of this kind of popular discourse and popular mobilization that gave rise to hegemonic crisis, as it was the case in Peru and Argentina. So here in Central America, it was the antecedent condition. It was like divisions from within, like the traditional elements of the wealthy classes, the conservative and the liberals, and they actually they disagreed, or they had kind of disputes over the scope and the size of the expansion of the commercial agriculture, to what extent, you know, to transform the communal lands or the common land system into a privatized or private ownership system. So it was like mainly, it was not the subject was not the labor incorporation or to change, the institutional configuration in a way that allowed for the incorporation or handling this social question. It was mainly the state and the agrarian structure, how to modernize the state apparatus in order to shield, liberals from the threat came from conservative, and to proceed with this agrarian, to transform these agrarian structures. So the state policies, rather than this some sort of class representation, was the subject of disputes or disagreement. And with this kind of reactive sequence, it was not like the counter mobilization from the conservative bloc, or some sort of representative of the dominant oligarchical class or oligarchical interest, but it was like, democratization movement or lower class mobilization that not necessarily limited to or reduced to labor, but it contained or it included a wide range of class groups. We will talk more about, this rural mobilization next time, and the implications of these rural mobilizations and the revolutionary orientation in the country after the Cuba Revolution in the late 50s. But here it was like, this kind of, instead of the counter mobilization from the conservative bloc, it was like the lower level. It came like some sort of transformation and backlash against the existing or the prevailing institutional structure. They came from these lower classes, and how actually how the state responded to the social class actor. It was essential, this response, as it was like essential in the popular incorporation period in elsewhere. It was essential as well in Central America, because it did shape the entire regime and political dynamics. So it shaped the party systems in different countries, as it happened in Mexico and Venezuela, by transforming the majoritarian coalition and the enactment of the traditional, or the consolidation of power of the traditional party system in Colombia and Uruguay, or this kind of polarization in Brazil and Chile, or this kind of impossible game and difficult game of transition because of this kind of party, like polarized party system in Argentina first, and then a hegemonic crisis that in Peru, that made it difficult for any party to lead, or to engineer this transition. So as it affected, it had like long-term implications for a party system or the structure of the party system, and the dynamics of the political dynamics, or the contours of the political process or political dynamics. It had like similar consequential element, and it was like kind of self-reproducing with regard to regime endurance or regime change in Latin America, with democratization or establishing, democratic system in Costa Rica, and traditional authoritarianism, Honduras and Nicaragua, and then military dictatorship or military authoritarianism in Guatemala and El Salvador. So next time I'll talk more about, what happened in with this kind of lower class mobilization and rural areas, or rural mobilization and peasants revolts in Central America, and what happened, and why some countries managed to carry out or to initiate this kind of to have a successful revolutionary process. In Nicaragua, like surprisingly, they managed to transform this traditional authoritarian regimes, but they failed in Guatemala and Salvador, and the countries actually went into a long period of civil war. So I'm going to talk how this kind of political equilibrium that actually got established during this period faced some sort of political instability and gave rise to another a different kind of institutional development or institutional transformation in the region. And this is against the backdrop of the international intervention, basically from the United States, and this kind of Fidel de Castro's, category of understanding about socialism and revolutionary actor, and how actually it affected the political dynamics in the entire region. So I leave it there today, and next time I'll defer, the whole story about, this rural mobilization and civil war and socialist revolution for the next week. Okay, bye.